Ryan Marsh had built the Titan Sports Academy from an empty warehouse and 12 kids who had nowhere else to train. 8 years later, it was the most successful youth development program in the region. Until the morning Isabel Cross decided it was an asset worth acquiring and a coach worth replacing. Isabel Cross had built Apex Sports Management into the dominant force in regional athletics. She had acquired 4 youth programs in 3 years. She had never kept a single original coach. She said Apex was taking the academy in a new direction. She said his contract would not be transferred. She said it in front of 7 of his coaching staff and did not soften a single word. What Isabel Cross had not planned for was the doorway, or the 7-year-old in the red puffer jacket who had gotten bored of waiting in the corridor and had decided to see what was taking so long. He found her in the doorway and crouched down. She said, "Did they make you leave?" He said, "Yes." She looked at the room behind him. Then she looked back at him and said, "Their loss." He took her hand, and they walked out together. She hadn't let go of the football. He hadn't looked back. There was nothing back there that belonged to him anymore. Everything that did was walking beside him. Ryan Marsh arrived at the academy every morning at 5:30, 90 minutes before the first junior session began. He used those 90 minutes the same way every day, reviewing the training notebook, adjusting the session plan, walking each court to make sure the equipment was right. Not because anyone required it. Because he had learned, in 20 years of sport, that the difference between a good session and a great one lived entirely in the preparation no one saw. He had started Titan with 12 kids, all of them from the East Side, most of them with more talent than opportunity. He had charged what families could afford, which for 8 of the 12 was nothing. He had made this work by coaching evenings at a private club, using every penny of it to keep the academy running. By year 3, he had 40 players. By year 6, he had a waiting list. Zara had been coming to the academy since she was 4, which meant she had been watching her father coach for 3 years and had developed opinions about it. She did not share these opinions during sessions. She shared them afterward, in the car, in the specific direct manner of a 7-year-old who has processed something and arrived at a conclusion. He had learned to take her assessments seriously. She was right more often than several of his assistant coaches. Zara's mother had died when Zara was 2. A sudden illness, the kind that gives no warning and allows no preparation. Ryan had been in the middle of building the academy when it happened. He had taken 3 weeks, during which his assistant coaches had run everything, and then he had come back because coming back was what Zara needed to see. Not that grief didn't exist, but that it didn't stop you from doing what you were supposed to do. Isabel Cross had first visited Titan Sports Academy 14 months before the termination. She had come as a potential partner, that was the word she had used, partner, and Ryan had shown her the facility, the player development records, the alumni who had gone on to professional programs. She had asked good questions. She had taken notes. She had left without committing to anything and called 3 days later with an acquisition offer. Ryan had read the acquisition proposal 4 times over 2 days. The offer was fair, more than fair for a facility of Titan size. The contract had included a clause guaranteeing his position as head coach for a minimum of 18 months. He had asked his solicitor about the clause. His solicitor had said it was standard. Ryan had signed because the resources Apex could bring, facility upgrades, expanded programs, professional pathways for his players, were things he had been trying to build toward for 8 years on a shoestring. The night he signed the Apex agreement, Zara had asked him why he was selling the academy. He told her he wasn't selling it. He was getting it help. She had looked at the football in her lap for a moment. Then she said, "Will it still be ours?" He had said yes. He had believed that when he said it. What Ryan had not seen in the acquisition document, what his solicitor had not flagged clearly enough, was a secondary clause embedded in Section 14, subsection 3, which allowed Apex to restructure operational leadership at any acquired facility if the facility's performance metrics diverged from Apex Group targets by more than 15% in any rolling 6-month period. The targets had been set by Apex. Ryan had never been shown them. 6 months after the acquisition, Ryan had noticed the first discrepancy. The player development metrics Apex was reporting to its board showed Titan's youth graduation rate, the percentage of players progressing to regional and national programs, as 41%. The actual figure, from Ryan's own records, was 67%. He had assumed a data entry error. He had sent a correction to Marcus Webb, Isabel's operations director. Webb had thanked him and said he would look into it. Webb had not looked into it. 8 weeks later, Ryan had pulled the comparative data himself. Every Apex-acquired facility, every reported metric versus his own internal records. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. Apex was systematically underreporting performance figures across all 4 acquired facilities. Low reported performance justified low investment. Low investment justified restructuring. Restructuring justified removing the original coaching staff and replacing them with lower-cost Apex employees. Ryan had seen this pattern play out at 2 of the other 3 acquired facilities before it happened to him. On a Saturday morning 6 weeks before the termination, Zara had asked him what he was worried about. He had told her he was thinking through a problem at work. She had asked what kind of problem. He said, "Someone is saying things aren't as good as they are." She said, "Why?" He said, "So they can say they need to change things."
She thought about this.
Then, "But things are good." He said, "I know." She said, "So show them." Ryan spent the 6 weeks before the termination building the case he already knew he was going to need. He had his own player development records going back 8 years. Every session, every player, every progression metric tracked in the training notebook with the discipline of someone who understood that data was the only language institutions actually heard. He began cross-referencing his records against every Apex board report that referenced Titan's performance. Every discrepancy, documented. Every alteration, time-stamped. The notebook contained 8 years of unaltered data. Every player who had come through Titan's program, every metric tracked from first session to final assessment. It was the kind of record that only exists when someone keeps it not because they are required to, but because they believe the work deserves to be counted accurately. Ryan had kept it because he believed that. He had not known when he started it that it would one day be the thing that proved what had been done to him. He called a woman named Dr. Priya Nair, a sports performance analyst who had worked with 3 national governing bodies and whose consulting practice focused on youth development program evaluation. They had met at a regional coaching conference 4 years earlier. She had given him her card and said, "If you ever need someone to read your data properly, call me." He had kept the card. He called it now. Dr. Nair had reviewed the documentation for 10 days. She had called him on a Thursday evening and said that the performance data discrepancy was not a reporting error. It was systematic and directional, meaning every deviation moved in the same direction, downward. She said, "Someone is managing these numbers, not measuring them." Ryan said, "I know." She said, "Do you want me to put that in writing?" He said, "Yes." Every word. Dr. Nair's report was 44 pages. It established, with statistical specificity, that the performance data Apex had been presenting to its board for the 4 acquired facilities had been adjusted downward in a pattern consistent with deliberate manipulation rather than measurement variance. The report named Titan specifically, quoted from Ryan's training notebook, and concluded that the facility's actual graduation rate of 67% ranked it among the top 15 youth development programs in the country. Apex had been reporting it as 41. 3 days before the termination, Zara had asked Ryan which player he was most proud of. He had thought about it, actually thought, not deflected, and named a 14-year-old named Leon who had come to Titan at 11 unable to control a ball at walking pace, and who was now being assessed for a regional academy. She had nodded seriously. Then she said, "Will Leon still get to come if things change?" Ryan had told her yes. He had meant it. He had prepared 3 copies of the package before the termination. He had known it was coming for 3 weeks, from the way Marcus Webb had stopped returning his calls and the way the Apex brand managers had begun photographing the facility without telling him why. 1 copy for the regional sports governing body, 1 for the National Youth Development Authority, and 1 for a journalist named Tom Adeyemi who covered sports governance for a national publication and whom Ryan had spoken to once, briefly after a coaching conference, about the way youth sport was being commercialized at the expense of the athletes it was supposed to serve. The night before the termination, though he hadn't known it was the night before, Zara had said, "Dad, are you going to fight for it?" He had looked at her. He said, I'm going to make sure the right thing happens. She said, that's the same thing. He said, sometimes.
She thought about this.
Then she pulled the football tighter against her side and went to sleep, which was her way of saying the conversation was complete. He had known when he arrived that morning. Isabel's car was in the car park. She never came to sight before 10 o'clock. Marcus Webb's car was beside it. Two others he didn't recognize. He had walked in at his usual time. He had put his notebook in his jacket. He had gone directly to the court and run the junior warm-up session as scheduled, because the players were there and the session was scheduled and nothing that was about to happen to him was their problem. He had run the full session. 40 minutes, every drill as planned, every correction given. When the session ended, he had sent the players to the changing rooms, told his assistant coach to take the afternoon session, and walked into the meeting room where Isabel Cross was waiting. He had walked in with the notebook in his jacket and his hands entirely steady and absolutely no intention of making what was about to happen easy for anyone. Isabel Cross spent the afternoon of the termination reviewing the Titan rebrand schedule. New signage, new programming structure, new coaching appointments. She had done this with 3 other facilities, and the template was established. She had expected Ryan Marsh to be the same kind of problem the other coaches had been: resistant, temporarily noisy, ultimately manageable. She had not yet understood what kind of preparation she had walked into. The call came 4 days after the termination. It was from Apex's communications director, who told her that a journalist named Tom Adeyemi had submitted a detailed request for comment on a story about performance data manipulation across Apex's acquired youth facilities. The request cited specific figures. It cited a 44-page analytical report. It cited the name of the analyst. Isabel set down her pen and asked, very quietly, how specific the figures were. The communications director told her. She said, "Get me legal.
Now."
The legal review took 2 days. What it found was what Isabel had on some level already known was there, that the performance reporting system Marcus Webb had implemented across the acquired facilities had been generating systematically adjusted output, that this adjustment had served the acquisition strategy, and that Webb had been doing it with the knowledge that the numbers reached Isabel's desk before they reached anyone else. She had seen what she had been given. She had not asked whether what she had been given was accurate. She called Webb into her office at 7:30 on the morning of the 3rd day. She put Dr. Nair's report on the desk in front of him and asked him one question: had he adjusted the performance data before it reached her? He did not answer immediately. In the silence of that non-answer, she understood that she had been running a company on numbers she had not verified, built on an acquisition strategy that had depended on those numbers being wrong, and had terminated 4 coaches, including one whose program was ranked in the top 15 in the country, on the basis of a dataset that had been manufactured. Isabel had built Apex Sports Management because she had genuinely believed that well-resourced, professionally managed programs could do more for young athletes than underfunded independent facilities. She had believed this when she started. She still believed it. What she had not done was build the systems that would ensure the belief was actually being enacted rather than used as language while a different thing was happening underneath it. Standing at her window on a Thursday afternoon, this distinction felt very precise and very important. She called the regional sports governing body on Friday morning before Tom Adeyemi's story ran. She requested an urgent meeting and told them, in the specific language of someone choosing accuracy over protection, that she had reason to believe Apex's performance reporting across its acquired facilities had been systematically inaccurate and that she was initiating a full internal audit. The governing body representative asked if she was making this call voluntarily.
She said yes.
He asked why. She said, "Because the alternative is to wait until someone else makes it for me, and that's not how I want to run this company." Ryan had spent the days since the termination doing 3 things: walking Zara to school, responding to messages from parents of Titan players who wanted to know what was happening, and waiting, not anxiously, in the specific patient way of someone who has put everything they have into a system and is giving the system time to work. Tom Adeyemi's story ran on a Monday morning. Ryan had read it at the coffee shop on the corner, 2 flat whites in, Zara at school. The piece was 6,000 words. It named every facility. It reproduced the key figures from Dr. Nair's report. It described the gap between Titan's reported 41% and its actual 67% as the distance between a management strategy and the truth. Ryan had read that sentence 3 times. Isabel read the article 4 times. She was looking for inaccuracies, not to dispute them, to know if any existed before anyone else pointed them out. There were none. Adeyemi had been accurate in every particular. The article described Apex's proactive engagement with a governing body and her voluntary disclosure as a step that complicates the narrative of straightforward institutional misconduct, which was accurate, and which she noted as the kind of accuracy that only happens when a journalist is genuinely trying to get something right. By noon, Ryan had received 61 messages. Parents of Titan players, coaches from other facilities he had worked with or against, 2 national governing body officers, 3 journalists other than Adeyemi, and 1 message from a number he didn't recognize that said only, "This is Isabel Cross. I'd like to speak with you. I think it should be in person. Tell me when you're available." He had sat with her message for 20 minutes. He had thought about what the conversation was actually for, not for him. He already knew his position, but for the institution. The players. Leon, who was being assessed for the regional academy. The 11 kids on Titan's waiting list, who didn't know yet whether the program that was going to take them would still exist in 6 months. He replied, "Thursday at 10 o'clock. The facility on Crane Street. I'll be there." That evening, Zara told him she had explained the situation to her best friend at school. He asked what she had said. She said, "I told her my dad's job got taken away because someone lied about the numbers, but the real numbers were in his notebook, and now everyone knows." He looked at her. He said, "That's exactly what happened." She said, "I know." She went back to the football. "When do you get it back?" He said, "We'll see on Thursday." He wore the charcoal jacket, not because it was the right kind of clothing for this meeting, but because he had decided that walking in as himself, not in the dark athletic jacket that was his usual armor, made a specific point. He was not coming as the coach they had fired. He was coming as someone who had decided what this conversation was for. At the school gate, Zara had straightened his jacket collar, both lapels, deliberately, with the focused care of someone performing an important task. He had let her. She stepped back, assessed, and said, "Good." He said, "Thank you." She said, "Tell her the numbers." He said, "I will." She walked through the gate. She did not look back. The Crane Street facility was one Apex managed but had not acquired. It was a venue higher, neutral ground. Ryan had chosen it for that reason. He arrived at 9:50. He found a table in the facility's meeting room, placed the training notebook on the surface, and waited.
He was good at waiting.
20 years of competitive sport teaches you that patience is a skill, not a personality trait. Isabel arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. She had come alone. She had decided that bringing anyone from her team would communicate the wrong thing, and she was precise enough about communication to care about this even in a moment that was costing her. She found him in the meeting room. She saw the training notebook on the table. She sat down across from it and said, "Is that what I think it is?" He said, "Yes." She said, "I want to tell you what I knew and what I didn't, and I'm asking you to let me finish before you respond." He said, "Go ahead." She said, "I didn't know the data was being adjusted." That's true. It's also true that I built a system in which adjusted data could reach me without verification, because verification would have slowed the acquisition pace, and the acquisition pace was the metric I was managing to. So I didn't know, and I also didn't look. She said, "I terminated you on the basis of a performance gap that didn't exist. Marcus Webb created the gap by adjusting the numbers. I signed off on the termination without verifying the data it was based on. What happened to you was a consequence of a system I built and a standard of verification I didn't hold myself to." She set her hands flat on the table. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to hear it stated accurately, not managed." Ryan listened to everything she said. He had prepared for various versions of this conversation: defensive versions, managed versions, legal versions. This was none of those versions. She was not managing him. She was accounting to him. That was different, and the difference required a different kind of response than the ones he had prepared. He told her about the night he had first seen the discrepancy. He told her how long he had spent verifying it before concluding it was intentional. He told her that he had called Dr. Nair not because he planned to go public. He hadn't planned that, not first, but because he had needed someone with authority to confirm what he was seeing was real before he decided what to do about it. He said, "I wasn't building a case against you. I was making sure I was right before I said anything." Isabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You verified before you filed." He said, "3 times." She said, "And you went to the governing body before Adeyemi." He said, "The governing body first. Then Adeyemi when I didn't hear back in 48 hours." She said, "That's not how someone tries to cause damage." He said, "No, it's how someone tries to stop it." She asked if she could look at the notebook. He pushed it across the table. She read 3 pages in silence. Not the summary pages, the detailed ones, the ones with individual player records going back to year 1. She read Leon's page. She read the page of a girl named Amara who had joined Titan at 9 and was now 16 and playing for the national under-17s. She closed the notebook and returned it to him. She said, "This is what we were reporting as 41%. He said 4 things. Reinstatement as head coach with full operational authority, not advisory, not consultative, operational. An independent audit of all 4 acquired facilities by Dr. Nair, with results published to the governing body. A community access guarantee at Titan, a minimum of 30% of program places reserved for local young people regardless of ability to pay, written into the operating agreement permanently. And Marcus Webb's removal from any role that involved contact with performance data." Isabel said Webb was already suspended pending the governing body inquiry and would not be returning in any capacity. She said Dr. Nair's audit she had already initiated. She had called Priya Nair's office the day before this meeting. She said the community access guarantee was the condition she had not expected and was the one she most respected, and she would have her legal team put it into the operating agreement before the end of the week. She said the reinstatement she could confirm today. She said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "Go ahead." She said, "The community access model, the 30%, is that something you designed for Titan specifically, or is it something that could work across all 4 facilities?" He looked at her for a moment. He said, "It's something I've been running at Titan for 8 years. I know exactly how to make it work. Whether it works somewhere else depends entirely on whether the people running it actually believe in it." She said, "I do." He said, "Then let's find out." She had read the answer in his face before he said anything, which was always the case. She said, "You got it back." He said, "I got it back." She said, "Did you tell her the numbers?" He said, "She already knew the numbers. She just needed to hear them said out loud." Vara thought about this. Then she tucked the football under her arm and took his hand, and they walked home. She was satisfied with the result. Isabel presented to the regional sports governing body on the following Monday. She brought the full audit initiation documentation, the Webb suspension notice, the reinstatement letter, and the community access guarantee. The panel chair asked her why she had made the voluntary disclosure before the article ran. She said, "Because the choice was between disclosing it, and managing it would have meant continuing to build something on a foundation I knew was wrong." The panel chair made a note. He said, "That's the right answer." He arrived at 5:30 on a Monday morning, 90 minutes before the first session, the same as he always had. The facility had Apex branding on the walls. He had decided to leave that question for later. It was not the urgent thing. The urgent thing was the session plan in the training notebook and the 14 players who would arrive at 7 o'clock, and Leon, who had his regional assessment in 3 weeks and needed a specific kind of preparation that Ryan had designed and no one else had run. Leon's first session back had been a Tuesday. He had not said much when he arrived. He was a 14-year-old boy, and 14-year-old boys did not have the language for what the past 3 weeks had been. But in the second half of the session, after a particularly clean piece of work, he had stopped and looked at Ryan and said, "I knew you'd be back." Ryan had said, "How?" Leon had said, "Because you never leave a session early." Ryan had not had an answer for that. He had blown the whistle for the next drill. Isabel visited Titan 3 weeks after the reinstatement. She had not called ahead. She had learned, from the way Ryan had handled everything, that preparation without verification was a habit she needed to break. She stood at the side of the court for 40 minutes and watched a session she had not scheduled, run by a coach she had terminated, for players whose development metrics she had been given inaccurately. She watched the room. She understood, standing there, the precise nature of what she had nearly destroyed. Zara had been there, in the stands, in her usual spot. She had noticed Isabel the moment she walked in. Zara noticed everything that changed in that building. She had watched Isabel watching her father for the full 40 minutes. When the session ended and her father walked over to speak with Isabel, Zara climbed down from the stands and stood a few feet away, football in both hands, doing what she always did in situations she hadn't yet classified, waiting and watching. Isabel had crouched to Zara's level, entirely naturally, without the self-consciousness some adults brought to it. She had looked at the football and said, "Is that yours?" Zara had said, "Yes. I've had it since I was 4. Isabel had said, "It's seen some use." Zara had said, "That's because it's been used." Isabel had looked at her for a moment and then said, "Your father told me you knew something was wrong before he did." Zara said, "I just told him to show them the numbers." Isabel said, "Good advice." Zara said, "I know." Before she left, Isabel had said, "I want to implement the community access model at the other 3 facilities. I need you to design it, not adapt it, design it from the beginning for each context." He had said, "That's a significant amount of work." She had said, "I know. I'm asking because you're the right person to do it, and because it's the thing that should have been there from the start." He had said, "Give me a week to think about what it requires. Then we'll talk." Dr. Nair's full audit of all 4 Apex-acquired facilities was completed in 6 weeks. The results confirmed what Ryan's initial analysis had indicated but extended it significantly. The adjusted performance data had affected not just external reporting but internal resource allocation, meaning that the facilities with the strongest actual performance had received the least investment, because the adjusted numbers made them appear to need it least. The entire funding model had been inverted. Isabel read the full audit report on a Saturday morning, all 71 pages, the data appendices, Dr. Nair's methodology section, the recommendations. She had cleared the day. By page 40, she had stopped taking notes because what she was reading required something other than annotation. It required sitting with the full dimensions of what had been built in her name and what it had cost the young people it was supposed to serve. She presented the full audit results to the Apex board, unredacted. She told them the adjusted performance data had been a systematic manipulation, that it had shaped acquisition decisions, investment decisions, and 4 coaching terminations, and that the cost to Apex of not disclosing this voluntarily would be significantly higher than the cost of disclosing it now. She then told them that she was restructuring the reporting architecture from the ground up and that the redesign was being led by the coach she had terminated. One board member asked why him. She said, "Because he's the person who kept accurate data when everyone around him stopped." Ryan had spent 3 weeks designing the new performance reporting framework. It was built on one principle. The data had to travel from the player to the board without passing through anyone with an interest in adjusting it. He had drawn it 17 times on the whiteboard before he found the version that worked. When he showed it to Dr. Nair, she had looked at it for a long time and then said, "This is what a youth sport reporting system is supposed to look like." He said, "I know. I've had it in my head for 8 years." Leon's regional assessment was on a Thursday in March. Ryan had stood at the side of the court for 2 hours, watching but not interfering. The work was done, had been done for 3 years, and the assessment was not the work, it was the demonstration of the work. Leon had played the best football of his life that afternoon, which Ryan had predicted because stress, properly prepared for, produces clarity rather than constriction. Leon had known that. Ryan had taught him. He had told Zara about Leon's result the same evening. She had gone very still, the particular stillness she had when something important arrived, and then held the football up for 1 second and set it back down. She said, "That's because you came back." He said, "That's because Leon worked." She said, "Both." He said, "Both." She went back to the sandwich she had been eating because the matter was settled. Ryan had presented the community access model to the other 3 facility managers in April. He had spent 3 days designing a version of it specific to each context, different communities, different catchment areas, different access barriers. The principle was the same: 30% of program places for local young people regardless of ability to pay, with an active outreach program rather than passive open-door policy. One manager had asked how you maintain quality if intake isn't based on ability. Ryan had said, "You define quality correctly. Ability is an outcome of good coaching, not a prerequisite for it." Isabel had visited Titan once a month since the reinstatement. Not to manage, she had been explicit about that. To observe and to ask questions. Ryan had learned that her questions were good, which meant she was actually looking at the sessions rather than confirming what she had already decided about them. Once, watching a session for 12-year-olds, she had asked him how he determined which players needed individual attention versus which needed to develop within the group dynamic. He had talked for 20 minutes. She had taken notes. The first cohort under the Community Access Guarantee had started in May. 11 young people, ages 8 to 12, from the surrounding area. 6 of them had never been in a sports facility before. Zara had watched their first session from the stands with the focused assessment she gave everything. Afterwards, she had told Ryan that one of the girls in the group had good instincts, but was afraid to make mistakes. He said, "I know. I'm working on it." She said, "She reminds me of Leon at the beginning." He looked at her. He said, "She does, actually." Zara said, "Good," and went back to her football. He had added 11 new pages to the training notebook in May. One for each new player: name, date of first session, initial assessment, the thing he had noticed in the first 20 minutes that he would need to remember. He had been keeping records this way for 8 years. He would keep them this way for as long as he was coaching. The notebook was not a document of what had happened. It was a document of what was possible for each person who walked through the door, kept by someone who believed in it. The new reporting framework had been operational for 8 weeks. Isabel reviewed it every Monday morning. The numbers were sometimes lower than the adjusted figures had been. Real numbers were. But they were moving in the right direction, and more importantly, she could trace each number to its source. She had started annotating the weekly report with questions, not for Webb's team to answer. He was gone, but for herself. Asking herself what each figure meant and what it required from her. It took longer than the old process. It was the right process. On a Saturday in June, Zara had shown him a technique she had been working on for 3 weeks, a movement she had designed herself, based on something she had seen in a session and adapted. He had watched it twice. On the 3rd iteration, she had executed it cleanly. He had nodded once. She had looked at him with the expression of someone who has received the only review that matters. He said, "Put it in your notebook." She said, "I already did." 6 months after the reinstatement, Titan Sports Academy had 73 players enrolled across 4 age groups. 22 of them were on the Community Access Program. 3 were in regional assessment pipelines. Leon had been offered a place at a professional youth academy and had accepted. The girl Zara had identified in the first community cohort session had become, in the language of the training notebook, a player of significant interest. Ryan had written that on her page in the first week. He had not been wrong. Isabel had said on one of her monthly visits that she wanted to take the community access model national, not just the 4 acquired facilities, a published framework that any sport program could adopt. Ryan had said that was a different kind of work from coaching. She had said she knew, and that she wasn't asking him to do it alone. He had said, "What does that look like?" She had said, "It looks like you design it and I resource it, and we both make sure it stays honest." He had considered this. He said, "That's a reasonable division of labor." She had said, "I thought you'd see it that way." Zara had started keeping her own training notebook. Not her father's system exactly, her own version, which had columns he didn't use and categories she had invented. When he had first noticed it and asked what she was recording, she had said, "The things that work and the things that don't, and the reason for both." He had looked at the page for a moment. He said, "That's exactly what a training notebook is." She said, "I know. I've been watching you do it for 3 years." At the end of a Tuesday in July, Zara had sat beside him in the empty stands after the last session had cleared. She had the football. He had the notebook. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then she said, "Dad." He said, "Yeah." She said, "When I'm old enough, can I coach here?" He looked at her. He said, "You already do."
She thought about this.
She seemed to find it satisfactory. She opened her notebook and went back to writing, and he opened his, and the facility was quiet around them, and the light came through the high windows in long warm lines, and it was exactly what it was supposed to be.